Hello and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. I'm Aaron Porras here with ILTV's Morning Briefing.
It's been just 4 days since Avigdor Lieberman resigned from his post as defense minister and pulled his party out of the ruling coalition, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is still scrambling to keep the government in one piece. But a perfect storm has begun to brew, leading most to start bracing for early elections. First, the next national elections are mandated anyway for November 2019, but now that Lieberman and his Israel Beitenu party left the coalition with a slim 61-seat majority, cabinet ministers Kahlon and Bennett have started to rally for early elections. And many right-wing Israelis agree that with no clear majority or direction in the Knesset, an election may indeed be the best move. Second, between a controversial budget cut, clashes over military enlistment, and a host of other bills on the Knesset floor, the unity of the remaining parties in the coalition is legitimately in question. Still, Netanyahu has for now taken up the defense ministry position for himself and will attempt to at least keep the government from collapse until his term comes to an end. And Likud officials agree with him, saying that, quote, "We have a nationalist government that could continue for another year," and that the smaller parties in the coalition are behaving irresponsibly by creating unnecessary instability. The United States has just made headlines at the United Nations again on Friday after rejecting for the first time a United Nations General Assembly resolution demanding that Israel return the Golan Heights to Syria. The call to return the Golan is made often, and this weekend it was brought up again along with 8 other resolutions condemning Israel for various alleged crimes against the Palestinians. But while the United States typically abstains from these votes, this time a decisive vote was announced. Israel captured the Golan Heights during the 1967 Six-Day War and annexed it afterwards. The international community largely condemns this annexation, and the United States shared the same view, but refrained from demanding Israel return it out of security concerns. And now, United States Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley went one step further by, quote, "addressing the elephant in the room," end quote. She said the United States will no longer abstain when the UN engages in its useless annual vote on the Golan Heights. Quote, "If this resolution ever made sense, it surely doesn't today." She continued that not only is the resolution biased against Israel, but, quote, "the atrocities the Syrian regime continues to commit prove its lack of fitness to govern anyone. The destructive influence of the Iranian regime inside Syria presents major threats to international security. ISIS and other terrorist groups remain in Syria, and this resolution does nothing to bring any parties closer to a peace agreement, so the United States will vote no," end quote. Syrian officials claimed the decision is further evidence that the United States is no longer the Middle East mediator it suggests itself to be, but that nevertheless it was not a surprising result. The resolution in the end totaled 151 votes in favor to 2 against, 14 abstentions. It's been over a month since the attack, and Ashraf Walid Sulaiman Na'alawa, who murdered his co-workers at the BARKAN industrial park, is still on the run. The Border Police's counterterrorism Yamam unit, Shin Bet forces, and troops from the IDF's elite Duvdevan, Lotar, and Oketz units are all participating in the manhunt for Na'alawa. But meanwhile, his mother and brother were indicted by a West Bank military court on Thursday on charges that they knew that Na'alawa was planning the attack and did not try to prevent it. The IDF spokesperson's unit released a statement that read, quote, "2 weeks before the attack, the terrorist indicated that he intended to carry out an attack and die as a martyr," end quote. And according to the indictment, his mother knew that he had gathered weapons and was training to use them. Further, she allegedly informed Na'alawa's brother about his intentions to carry out the attack and die as a martyr. Still, the military statement said that neither of them attempted to contact authorities or prevent the attack. Additionally, Na'alawa's brother is also being charged with obstruction of justice after hiding footage from the family's home security cameras. Multiple other suspects have also been indicted on similar charges. And finally, the IDF has ordered the partial demolition of the family home after a request by the Na'alawa family against the demolition was rejected. The demolition of the building was limited to the basement and ground floor in which Na'alawa lived. In other news, El Al Airlines said this weekend that it intends to file an official complaint against Jewish passengers aboard Flight 002 from New York City to Tel Aviv last week after they allegedly became violent with the flight crew. According to initial reports, religious passengers on the plane became irate when their flight was delayed so long that they wouldn't arrive before the Sabbath. But later accounts suggest that the trouble aboard El Al Flight 002 goes far beyond simple unhappy flyers. After most news outlets reported that violent religious passengers derailed a flight to Athens instead of Tel Aviv, some of the so-called violent passengers spoke out with some hard truths about the real experience aboard the plane. Betzel Steinhardt, a professional tour guide and the director of education at Rama Israel, blogged to the Times of Israel that only 20% max out of the 200 people who deplaned in Athens rather than desecrate the Sabbath were ultra-Orthodox. And he continued that he didn't see any violence, but rather disappointment, anger, and raised voices for sure. He said El Al was responsible for the problem, though. Proper observance of the Sabbath precludes any motorized or mechanical transportation, so observant passengers planned to arrive in Israel before the Sabbath began on Friday. But the flight was delayed from the outset over 5 hours because the crew arrived late. Not for inclement weather, but because their transport was ordered late. Then, rather than let religious passengers deplane immediately in New York in order to avoid breaking faith as the captain promised he would allow, the plane took off. Final reports showed that after 3 days' worth of delays and rude flights, passengers only today arrived back home.
That's all for now. I'm Aaron Porras, and see you later with our main daily broadcast from Israel at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.